What would happen if men had to pay for children even before they were born? Republican lawmakers have put forth the Unborn Child Support Act. This would make it possible for mothers to get child support from the time of conception. Now, the backlash to this bill has been swift and in some cases profane. Rapper 50 Cent posted and then deleted on his Instagram page, "Oh, F this." And then he said, "I quit." Not sure what he's quitting, but lots of folks are raising eyebrows about the timing and the meaning of this bill being put forth by Republicans to force men to pay child support. What does this really mean? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
For all women who get pregnant and choose to keep their baby, child support before the baby is born is a wonderful idea. We know lots of women get sick during pregnancy, lots of women can't work, and a lot of them just need the financial support of the father of their unborn baby. So on the surface, having men pay child support before the baby is born makes perfectly good sense. Well, it does, but you have to check the source and the motives of the people who are behind this new, proposed piece of legislation to force men to pay child support. It's not women, Democratic women. It's not pro-choice women. It's Republican lawmakers from some of the reddest states in the union, like Mississippi and Tennessee. Remember Marsha Blackburn, the Tennessee senator that gave Ketanji Brown Jackson hell about the definition of a woman? She's one of the sponsors of this bill. You have senators from Oklahoma and Montana even. So far, no Democratic senators have signed on to this plan to force men to pay child support. And the question we're asking, is this a backdoor way to force women to carry pregnancies to term that they otherwise wouldn't do but for the new Dobbs decision? Or do these Republican senators really care about women who are pregnant and their unborn children? Here to help us sort it all out, my first guest is Marcia Jones. She's the founder and executive director of AFIA Center in Texas, and she's been at the forefront of this fight to ensure that women have reproductive autonomy and rights over their bodies. She's joining me again this morning. Happy to see you again. Good morning, Marcia.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
So, Marcia, so much has happened since the Dobbs decision came down, overturning Roe v. Wade. We've seen states do some incredible things, like try to penalize doctors, pregnant women, even reach across state lines to penalize those folks that may travel to a state where abortions are legal. And now we have these Republican senators saying, we have the solution. Women who want to get an abortion, don't worry. We got you covered. We're going to get you some child support while you're pregnant. So you don't have to worry about, medical care or housing, transportation, food insecurity, so many other things that so many, particularly low-income parents or pregnant women deal with. What do you think about this proposed piece of legislation to make child support start from the moment of conception?
So for me, there's a couple of things that I think about with this. So it's interesting. I hadn't even given it that much thought. I was in my car a couple of days ago and I was listening to the D.L. Hughley show was playing. And there was this question that was put before and it was this. I didn't even pay that much attention because I was bothered by how people were the way they were talking about women, right? And so since this D.L. Hughley show, I jumped to the assumption that we're talking about Black women. It was like, no, we're not going to pay child support. Women always saying that babies, what was these ways in which they were talking about? And I was very offended. I was so much offended, I turned it off. And then when I got the email yesterday about this, and I spoke with my team, and I said, well, I'm not sure if they want me to be on here. I said, because let me tell you something. This is the absolute worst thing that can happen. This is a way in which we manipulate poor people, for one. This is another way of shaming people's on both sides of the coin. You're shaming men, you're shaming women. This is just an extension of all of these personhood acts that we have seen years and years in the fight to end and overturn Roe v. Wade, whereby which we are defining that at conception, that is a person, and that is not a person at conception. And why would you be paying child support for something that's not existent? I think that there are ways in which we can make sure that folk are taking care of children when they choose to carry, not when they are forced to carry. Because if you were not forcing people to carry, we would not even be talking about child support at conception. But you've chosen, so it's a way that the government, they don't want to. I would say if we were talking about in a normal situation, I would say, well, the government have created a problem that they want the citizens or they want their constituencies to take care of, right? But that's not it. This is a backdoor way of assuring that we never get access to full bodily autonomy again. This is a backdoor way of access of making sure that no matter how we bring this to the table, that they don't believe that we can win. What you said at the beginning was you have to look at who authored this bill. These people have never cared about folk getting financial relief. They've never cared. They've never cared if women get financial relief when they're trying to carry children. I know they don't care, because in the state of Texas, if a person gets behind on their child support, they can go to jail. They can have their licenses removed, the very thing that put them in a position where they can. And I'm not here to support men who do not take care of their families. I have a whole different conversation around child support and how that impact Black families. I'm going to just sit that somewhere else. But what I'm saying is, I don't want us to be deceived by these kinds of notions. I don't want us to get caught up. It reminds me of when Trump was in office and people were walking around saying, oh, Trump gave us a check. He didn't give us anything. And those kind of things divide the vote. It divides our community. It creates havoc. Now there's even more stuff that we have to go and explain. Now you have Black women and Black men and Black communities fighting against each other, harming Black women in the process, and still forcing people to carry a child to full term, to go full term, with a pregnancy that they did not choose to go through with, that the government said that they had to go through with. And now the government is saying somebody have to pay child support at the point of inception when there is no child at the point of conception.
Well, Marsha, I don't know why you thought I'd be mad at you. You know I feel the same way, girl. Nobody's stupid. We see through what this is all about. These are not senators that have ever supported, women, children, women in need. These are the same senators that would not vote to extend the child tax credit that would give money to parents of kids who are, we ain't got to argue about if this is a kid. Here it is. This 5-year-old Johnny, this is 7-year-old Mary, right here in our faces. They have food insecurity. They have housing insecurity. They have transportation insecurity. Give them $300 so that they can buy food. And these are the same folks who said absolutely positively not, never. And these are the same people that make it difficult for families to get food stamps, to get government assistance for housing, and so many other. Medicaid.
You're not even extended.
Yes. I mean, we can run down the list, but you raise a really good point. And the point beyond what we've already talked about is this divide and conquer. So there are going to be some folks who glom onto this and say, oh, this is great, because there are a lot of deadbeat dads out there that don't pay their child support. And there are a lot of women that need support while they are pregnant. And this is a great way to do it. And I'm in favor of it. How do we prevent women from falling prey, women and men, from falling prey to this deceptive bill that is designed really to reinforce the taking away of women's reproductive choices? Because that's what they're saying. They're saying, look, y'all say y'all can't have a baby because you ain't got no help, no money. We're going to give you some money, so we'll take that off the table. That's exactly what this bill is designed to do. But how do we get people to see this is just a ruse? This is just another gaslighting, manipulative play on the part of craven Republicans.
It is 100% gaslighting. So a couple of things have to happen. One, we have got to keep people investing in communities, investing in organizations like ours. And I'm not here as a shameless plug to get funding. I'm not doing that. So that we can continue to go into the community and talk to the community and help to electorally educate our voters and educate our community. So that's one of the things we have to do so that they understand when these things are happening, that it's not to their benefit. Then we have to remind folk, you did not want to be pregnant. You were forced to be pregnant. There would not have been a need for child support at conception if you were not forced by the government. So if the government created this problem, let the government fix this problem. If the government is going to force you to have a child that you did not want to have, the father did not want to have, I'm not going to get into that conversation because we're talking about bodily autonomy. You did not want to carry a pregnancy to full term that resulted in a child. Then let the government take care of it. Let the government put things in place. Let the government extend the welfare system. Let the government extend the food stamp system. Let the government decrease these housing waiting lists and create housing and affordable housing for people. Like literally put it right back on them. Let's have the conversation in that way, because forcing people to pay child support has never brought anybody out of poverty.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised another interesting point is, the pro-lifers, there's this whole debate about viability, right? When is a fetus viable? And that's another thing this bill does in a backhanded way, is it allows those pro-lifers to say a fetus is viable the day you miss a period. So now they take the whole viability argument off the table, because if I got to start paying child support, I'm not paying fetus support, I'm paying child support. So by definition, they have now determined scientifically, biologically, that fetus is a viable child on day one.
And here's the thing, they've not proven that.
No, it has not.
No, that's what I'm saying. What you're saying is that's the problem. They've not proven it, but they make all of that noise. And so we have got to make noise with the right information. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that we have to keep doing what we're doing. We have to keep driving it home. But I just was reading, and it had nothing to do with me doing this with you today. It just pulled up on my screen. And there's a couple here in Texas who had they wanted to get pregnant, but didn't know they were going to get pregnant as soon as 2022. Got pregnant in 2022. I think the pregnancy was early, like February. Got to May, everything was going great. She was 17 weeks gestation, and she started to lose her fluids, right? And I think it's like a membrane. It's called a membrane rupture. And so she's sitting there because of this thing. Cannot, because the doctors are saying you're 17 weeks. It is not viable. You need to have an abortion because it is not viable. Or we just going to have to wait till the heartbeat stops because it's not viable. Yep, it had a heartbeat, I guess. I don't know. It had something, but it was not viable. That's the thing. She was 17 weeks. It was not viable out of the womb. Had it even made it out of the womb, it would have had all of these difficulties that's going on. But the bottom line is the doctor's hands was couldn't do anything. But the bottom line is, and the doctor didn't say their name, they kept saying it is not viable. If you carry a full term, you're gonna have a beautiful baby girl, maybe. But right now, today, at 17 weeks, it is not viable outside of the womb. So if it's not viable outside of the womb, it is not a person. It is not a child. Why are we paying child support for a notion? But it's not about that. It is manipulating. It is manipulative, and it is going to divide our communities, because that's what happens when you dangle any kind of resources in front of people who are lacking resources.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And some of this child support, I don't know, maybe $100, when what you need is universal medical care. You need access to high quality medical care that a $100 child support payment is not going to give you access to. I want to get back to 50 cents though for a minute. So he goes off in this article. He says, oh, F this, F that. And a lot of people took that as him saying, maybe similar to what you were hearing on that on DL Hughley's show, is that men are sick of being forced to pay child support. And he said he's quitting. I quit. And we don't know if he meant I'm quitting having sex. I'm done having children. I'm done, with the United States and all these bills. Who knows? It wasn't explained. But what do you say to folks who, on the surface, hear about child support and have this kind of visceral response? Put aside, because you and I are in total agreement about this bill and the really, the nefarious motives of these sponsors. But it does raise a legitimate issue about how some men, and this man in particular, responded to the notion of child support.
So it is because of the way that child support have been rolled out. That's why I said that's another whole, we don't even have time on your show to talk about why this visceral reaction.
Give me a short version of what you mean when you keep alluding.
So we have rolled child support. So we have created this way in which we have used child support to monetize relationships, to monetize parental relationships, to monetize people, right? And so we have used child support in a way, I don't know, that child support in some way, we have forced Black men to step up and be men. And the way in which we're going to step them up to be men is to make them pay child support and then to make them be the owner of people having to be on welfare. It is really created to continue to divide families in a way. I'm not saying that people are not supposed to take care of their children. If all of the other systems were in place, I do believe that you wouldn't have to force people to pay child support. I do believe that people would take care of their families. They would not do it maybe in the way that you want to do it, but they would do it. But this forcing of child support is not the issue. It was not done to make sure that white men do what they're supposed to do. It really, even though white men do pay child support, let it be known. It is really a way in which to continue to devalue Black men, to devalue Black women in their relationship, and to really make it look like Black women use our reproductive choices in order to create wealth. And again, it's the same thing they said that we have babies to get welfare to create wealth. I have yet to see somebody get rich getting child support, even rich people, because they had a very lucrative life before they were divorced from their very rich husband. Even rich women, their lives change when there's a break in the finances in the house. So I've never seen anybody get rich with child support. I've never seen anybody get rich with the welfare system. So it is still just another way of controlling people's reproductive choices and how they make those choices and whom they make those choices with. So it is really another way of removing bodily autonomy. So that's kind of how I look at it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. I'm an advocate. And I just look at the ways in which these systems destroy families and destroy communities.
Yeah, no, great point. And I'm going to have you back, and I want to have a bigger conversation about child support because, we know, as so many states, as you indicated in Texas, states around this country, take away licenses, imprison people, and do other things that are very punitive. And there has to be a better way to create opportunities for children to be supported by their parents rather than putting the father in jail, which we know is not the solution to supporting a child. But thank you so much, Marsha, always for your insights on this. Glad to see you're still out there fighting this good fight. There's so much more work to do. I mean, this Dobbs has just created a nightmare, patchwork of laws all over this country. Different states, different laws. We're still trying to figure this out, what this post-Roe v. world will look like. And obviously, none of us know yet. We just know it's bad.
It's bad.
It's bad.
It's even scary. Areva, it's even scary. And I want people to really be clear about that. This is not going to be good this is just the beginning. This whole thing about the child support and all that. And know that these politicians know where to hit. To me, it's a form of voter suppression too. They know where to hit us where it hurt. But thank you again for letting me come. I was working out. Me and this time, we're gonna get it together. I told Sarita, I said, "Oh my God, I was working out."
Well, I'm glad to hear you're working out. Good for your health. But always a pleasure to see you, my friend. Take care and be well.
You have a good day. Bye-bye.
Okay. We're talking about this proposed bill where Republican senators are saying that dad should be forced to pay for child support at the point of conception. We're going to talk to some political scientists and social scientists about what this means politically and socially. My next guest, Dr. Mary Kate Lazat, is a professor at Augusta University. She's the author of Gender Differences in Public Opinions, Values, and Political Consequences. And Dr. Bethany Everett, she's a professor at the University of Utah. Good morning, Professor Everett and Professor Lazat. I want to start with you, Professor Everett. What was your reaction when you heard this proposed bill by Republicans to force fathers to pay child support or make it possible for mothers to get child support from conception?
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here. My initial reaction is that this is another way of trying to place the blame on individuals for a collective problem. So this is, you and MJ spoke about this already. We have a serious problem supporting pregnant people in this country in terms of access to social support, economic resources, healthcare, and instead of really dealing with those big collective issues, this is an attempt to punish individual people, to target individual people. And while in theory, supporting women, pregnant people during their pregnancies is a good idea, this is really just another attempt to try to skirt the real issue of the lack of social protections for pregnant people in this country.
Yeah, what do you say, Professor Lazat, to those people? And we were having this debate with our production team this morning, that there are women who get pregnant, who get sick, who can't work, and they need help. They can't find government support. They can't get perhaps good medical care. And the mom shouldn't bear it alone. The dad should kick in.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I definitely agree with both of the other guests that this is really just a ploy, that it is ignoring the real problems that exist with existing child support. It's ignoring the real problems that exist with our social welfare programs that don't support people enough who need it. And, you know, what's been happening is just an attempt to have our laws recognize personhood at an earlier stage than they have currently. So I completely agree with what your previous guests have been saying about this. It's definitely not where we need to be going. And it's unfortunate, as you mentioned, that a lot of people think that this sounds great. You know, on its face, it sounds like a good idea. There was a recent poll that actually found about half of the people in the poll supported it, women slightly more so. But I think that they're really not understanding the ramifications of something like this and how it's not really going to help women who need help. There are other ways that we can do that. And we should be focusing on that. And we should be focusing on how we shouldn't be forcing women to have children if that's not their desire.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that, Professor Everett, that the notion of conception doesn't automatically say to people, as Marcia just said, wait a minute, a fetus on day one is not a child. That hasn't been scientifically proven. We've been fighting about that in the Supreme Court. And this bill just makes that statement. I mean, it just declares that, even though it doesn't state that, but that's exactly what it's declaring. And if Professor Lazat said about 50% of women support that, we know that more than 65% of the country supports choice. So what does that say? Are women just not getting that? Because if you're pro-choice, automatically in my brain, I was like, wait a minute. So where's the disconnect there?
Yeah, I mean, Republican legislators are not stupid when they're making these bills. They're framing it in ways that make it seem like this is a good idea and we're trying to benefit women and mothers. But there is this slippery slope that they're starting with trying to define personhood at conception at earlier times that is going to come with a whole slew of unintended consequences that they haven't stated explicitly. Instead, they're couching it in this sort of supportive framework that eventually will lead to a whole host of other sort of negative consequences for women and mothers.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind for me immediately as a lawyer is if that's a person and you have an abortion, hey, that's murder. You just killed a person. So what's the difference than killing this person that's entitled to child support than, shooting a person on a street corner? And people aren't making that connection because once you define that fetus as a person, then they have all the rights and liberties as you and I and every other person that's walking this earth has. So people aren't making that connection. Professor Lazard, and then I don't know if both of you or either of you have seen this new Hulu special called Aftershock, which is about Black women, maternal mortality rates and the crisis, 33% increase in, Black maternal mortality rates. No conversation about that. I mean, very little conversation. Thank goodness this documentary's come out. It's gotten rave reviews. We've actually had the doctor that is, one of the experts in the documentary on our show. So, but why do you think that's so underplayed in this country?
That's right. It's terrible. It's abhorrent. The infant mortality rate and the maternal mortality rate in the United States is that of developing countries, and it should not be that way. In particular, in certain parts of the United States, like the Southeast, it's particularly high, likely because of the fact that there's more poverty, which is linked to race in our country. So yes, I agree. We should be giving a lot more attention to that issue and supporting women who are choosing to have children through our social welfare programs, through, making sure that doctors listen to women, regardless of the color of their skin. There's lots of research that shows that medical students have some prejudiced beliefs about Black women, about Black people. And those sorts of things need to be rectified in order to ensure that Black women do not have such a high mortality rate when they give birth. I also wanted to point out that this notion that Black men are not involved in their child's lives, that they do not support their children, that's a myth. That's a stereotype. The data does not support it. And so, this idea that gets perpetuated is highly problematic. It's obviously prejudiced. It's obviously, terrible, but it's also just completely not true.
Yeah, no, and thank you for stating that and making that obvious. We talk a lot about that. We've had lots of shows on that, busting those myths about Black fathers being absent, about not being financially supportive. But I do think, Professor Everett, this whole question of child support is raising the question about men and the role that men play when women get pregnant and what their financial responsibility should be. So there are, and probably why 50% of women in this poll, or not 50% of women, but you said overwhelming. Well, what did you say about the poll? Let's make sure I'm stating that correctly.
I said about half of the people in the poll supported the idea of having child support be retroactive or begin when a woman is pregnant. I don't believe that people were thinking about this in terms of the Dobbs decision. I don't think that was necessarily made salient in the poll, but yeah, about half, slightly more women.
Okay, so if those are the numbers, Professor Everett, does that say something to you as a sociologist about women thinking that men are not stepping up and that men need to be held more accountable?
Oh, gosh. I think it probably has something to do with women recognizing the toll of pregnancy and parenthood on their lives. We have so much data about how becoming a parent, specifically for women, impacts their income and their future educational achievements. And there's no way to grow up in this country and go through the educational system and start your career without understanding what the implicit and explicit messages are about motherhood are. And so I think those data probably represent is women saying, you know what? Being pregnant takes an economic toll. It disrupts your career. It can disrupt your educational achievement. And it's important for women to have financial support during that process.
But what does it say to you, though, about men? Do you think these women are saying it's important for us to have support and men aren't giving us enough support?
I don't know if I would say that, because I don't think the question really, it sounds like it didn't necessarily ask if they thought that men weren't giving them enough support. Mm-hmm. I do think there is a growing sort of collective frustration that as we see, as Roe was overturned, that there are a number of women, I think, who would like to see men more involved in the fight for reproductive rights and to see this as a collective issue. Instead of just only a women's issue, that it is a societal issue and that we really need to all be vocal and express our displeasure with the overturning of Roe.
But Dr. Lazat, I do wonder politically, though. We know that Democratic women, so far no Democratic senators have signed on to this bill, but Democratic lawmakers have proposed male responsibility bills in the past. Many of those bills have not made it very far. They haven't been passed into law. And sometimes, women are heckled or, mocked for doing so. So politically, why do you think there isn't more support for making men in the familiar structure more financially responsible?
Well, I think that we don't see a lot of support for this bill from Democrats because Democrats understand that sometimes getting into bed with conservatives doesn't serve them, that the Republican Party might have ulterior motives, such as, establishing personhood. I think that it's a complicated issue. I think that unfortunately, people haven't really been considering this issue as much as they should have been, particularly in light of the Trump administration being able to have so many Supreme Court appointees, and the fact that this was going to happen and that we were going to have to start to deal with a number of these issues. And now that it's happened, I think that, people just aren't sure in which direction to go. They're concerned about, what do the American people want? They're concerned about the midterm elections, and they haven't really, thought these things through enough. They haven't been able to have their focus groups, do their internal polling to understand what direction they should really go in. And it's really unfortunate because we knew that this was coming.
But do you think overall there's a sentiment in the country that men need to be made to do more? And not in the context of this bill, because we're all in agreement. This bill is just one big piece of gaslighting. So not this, but in the, women who want to have babies. I'm pregnant. I made a choice. I want to carry this baby to term. There's a father out there. Maybe we're not married. And is there a sense in those, those situations that men need to be made by the government, by legal process, to do more?
I think that to some extent it's difficult, right? Because you can't legislate, spending time with your children, teaching them how to throw a baseball. You can't legislate those sorts of things. You can't legislate even when parents live together, doing the dishes, changing diapers, all of those sorts of things. I mean, I think culture has changed and we see younger fathers being more involved, but the latest research that I've seen is still showing these discrepancies in terms of, women tend to be the primary caregivers if you're talking about, a heterosexual relationship. And they end up doing more of the work, in terms of time, whether it be housework or childcare. So I think that, yes, generally, women do want to have more, involvement from fathers. And that includes, financial support as well. But I think that there's a fine line between, what is able to be legislated and what is not. And there's a lot of other things going on here, like we've talked about, in terms of how the government can step in and support people. The government can provide more than just the child care tax credit. Other countries have subsidized child care. Other countries have, universal health care, as you mentioned. There's a lot of other ways in which, paid parental leave. Rubio, I believe, who proposed this bill, has also proposed, oh, well, sure, you can have paid parental leave, but you'll have to draw on your Social Security retirement benefits in order to get it. That's not what people want. They don't want to get it, from that. They want government support for it. And so I think that, there's a recognition that there needs to be more help, but not necessarily in this way.
And thank you for bringing that up about Senator Rubio, because as a political scientist, how do we get people to understand? Again, the first thing that came to mind to me when I saw the people signed on to this bill, I already knew, I didn't have to read it, but I already know their history. I know they cared, very little about women or helping women. How do you get people from a political standpoint to recognize that? Rubio wants to order men to pay child support from conception, but yet he won't fight for or sign on to or vote for a bill that gives women paid time off unless they draw it from their Social Security. So the hypocrisy in that. How do we get our voting public to recognize that?
It's definitely not an easy task. And I don't think that there's a simple answer to that, in particular because people are economically struggling right now, right, with inflation and everything. And so people are focused just on, making ends meet day to day. And so they're not, necessarily paying as much attention. They might be burnt out after, several years now of political polarization. And, just when you turn on the news, there's a lot of terrible things that have been happening. And so I think that we need to remind people, this is what you need to do. You need to pay attention. And that might mean, listening to the news on your way to work in the morning. That might mean downloading, a news app. That might mean watching your show. But, in general, it is, in your best interest to pay attention and make sure that you understand the complexity of these issues. But the easiest thing that people can do is to have a stable party identification, a party that they trust, and to rely on that, to use that as a heuristic. So if you trust the Democratic Party and they're not signing on to a bill like this, then don't support it.
Right? There's some reason why they're not.
Exactly.
A very good point. Professor Everett, Marshall raised this issue of child support being used as a wedge issue to drive a wedge between particularly families of color. How do you see that, the whole child support? I mean, we talked about states that imprison people, that take away their licenses, make it difficult for them to work, ding their credit, make it impossible for them to get home loans or credit cards. What do you think needs to happen around child support? And again, in a legitimate way that honors the real best interests of the child.
Yeah. I mean, the system needs a hard reset. The way that child support is used in the United States, in theory, again, is really, really important. That people need to take responsibility for their families. But the way that it's used in the United States is a cudgel. It's a way to maintain racial inequality. It's a way of maintaining economic inequality by punishing people who can't afford to make child support payments in ways that prevent them from being able to make future child support payments. It's a way of putting more people in prison and jails and funding the industrial prison complex. It's not a system that works for families in the way that it is run now. And it really needs, we need to take a hard look at it and figure out ways that we can reform child support in a way that actually supports families including help support fathers so that they can maintain involvement in their families.
Yeah, we did a really great show about fathers and the support that they don't get when they are trying to raise their children, either as single dads or dads who are trying to be involved in the lives of their children if the children are living with their mothers, and how little support. We had a college student on, and he was trying to graduate from college and trying to maintain his, responsibilities as a dad. And he said everywhere he went, it was like, for mothers only, mothers only. It was like he could get nothing. Like no one had thought that a dad like him needed support and wanted to be involved, but there were no programs really available for him to help his child, which was sad to hear, because you're right. We don't think about dads. We want them to give money, but he was like, I can't give money if I can't get a job. But there are all these things for mothers. He said even housing, he had a difficult time getting as a single dad, but that he knew was readily available for single moms.
Yeah.
Do you see any of that changing? Is it getting any better?
I have a hard time believing that much is getting better right now. We do a bad job in this country for families of all types, single parents, single moms, single dads. The Congress, it appears, might pass support for same-sex marriage to codify it, which is really exciting. However, it's not going to come with additional supports at the state level in terms of protections against employment discrimination, housing discrimination, all these other things. And so it's really important that we take a hard look at the economic roots of all the types of inequalities that we're seeing for families. And it makes me really concerned for the way that Roe is going to have such a huge economic ripple that we're not really going to fully understand until years later. We can anticipate how bad it's going to be, but I don't think we're able to see all the unintended consequences that are going to come from this. And just going back, Areva, to one of the things that you said about how women may be targeted for or charged with murder, right? If fetal personhood starts early. It doesn't even have to be just murder. If you think about what it's like to be a pregnant person and all the rules that you are given while you're pregnant, what you can and cannot do, we're likely to see a whole host of cases around child abuse for women who have a drink while they're pregnant, or a cigarette, or sleep the wrong way, or exercise the wrong way. We have no idea how this is all going to play out should personhood be established really early in pregnancy.
Yeah, great point. I'm thinking about, yes, there have been some cases where women have been targeted for their conduct during pregnancy. And again, giving this fetus personhood just emboldens those that would like to see women penalized, like you said, for having a drink, for smoking, for gaining too much weight, for not gaining enough weight, for eating the wrong foods. I mean, you can think of any number of activities, for going, jet skiing. Maybe that's too dangerous of an activity, and that's attempted, child abuse or something. So even though these things seem extreme, some of these laws that we're seeing being put forth tells us that we're not being dramatic about this. We're not exaggerating. There are really folks who are intent on controlling women and our bodies and our lives. And I do, Dr. Lizotte, I wonder about these states that are enacting all of these oppressive laws for women. Do you see them passing anything or putting forth any money to support all of these women that they're going to force to have children? If you're not able to get out of the South and get to Illinois or get across country to New York or California, and you're one of those women that's forced to have a child, carry a baby to carry a pregnancy to term, are you seeing states put up money for resources in their local states?
No, I mean, these are the same states that didn't expand Medicaid. So these are not the types of states that are going to provide that social safety net for these women that they're forcing to give birth. And, it's important to note that experts don't think that it's going to increase the number of adoptions. Women are going to be forced to give birth and then, want to raise their child and not give it up for adoption. But
why do experts think that? Why do they think women who are forced to carry a pregnancy to term we won't see an increase in adoptions? Or
I believe it's based on the Turned Away study that looked at women who were turned away from getting an abortion. They had, missed the cutoff, and they followed up with those women, and they found that, most of them ended up carrying the child to term because they didn't have the resources to go out of state to get an abortion at that late time. And they ended up, just adding a child to their family, even though many of them already had children and it was going to be a financial burden. These are not the types of states that we should expect to see, and we haven't seen yet, add all of these supports for women having children.
Have we seen, Professor Everett, any studies that show in these states what the increase will be in the number of children, unwanted, children who are born as a result of these forced pregnancies? Have there been any studies about that?
It's tricky right now to really estimate how many more children will be born. So as Dr. Lizette said, there are about only 10% of women chose to give their children up for adoption who were turned away from abortion. The way that abortion works now is very different than the way it functioned in the 1970s and prior to Roe in 1973. Medical abortion is now fairly easy accessible by mail, and you can order pills online. There are websites you can do this. So even women who live in states where abortion is illegal, some of them will have access to abortion via medication by mail. Some will be able to travel. But again, the women who are forced to have pregnancies that they did not want to have in these states, they're most likely going to be the women who have the fewest resources, who have the fewest sort of social or healthcare connections that they're able to access this information online or through their networks. And we're really likely to see that these increase in forced pregnancies are going to be concentrated among the women with the fewest resources.
And Dr. Lizette, has there been any studies on the economic impact that some of these red states may experience as a result of these forced pregnancies, whether it's increases in taxes or increases in revenue that has to be spent on supporting kids? Do you know if any of those studies have been done?
No, I haven't seen any studies on that, but it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these states that will not be allowing women to make these important choices, they are states that receive the most in funding from the federal government to support their citizens who are poor. So it's, ironic that these red states tend to be the ones that actually get the most from federal government in terms of supporting their citizens, in terms of social welfare payments. And, it's these blue states that are actually, paying more into that system and receiving less of it. So I think that ultimately, it's going to be the blue states that end up paying for it.
Well, if the red states are getting more money for these social services, why aren't the living conditions and quality of life of their residents being improved?
Well, because each state differs in terms of how generous they are for various social welfare benefits. And there are loopholes that states use to turn people away. You filled out this form wrong, so we're not going to give you the benefits. You missed the renewal date. We're not going to give you the benefits. And now they're allowed to use that money for other things. So a lot of times states are actually incentivized if they, so choose to turn people away from getting certain benefits, because then they can use that money, at a county level or at a state level for other things. And so, that's why we're really seeing not these huge benefits, even though they actually receive more funds from the federal government for this purpose.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just last question for you, Dr. Everett, where do we go from here? I mean, Marcia said this is a scary time for women and men, not just women. This is an issue that impacts all of us. As you said, we saw the House pass this, rights to marriage bill. Are we going to have to pass a rights to interracial marriage? Are we going to have to pass a bill to rights to contraception? I mean, contraceptives. How far do we have to go, to enforce our rights in this country? And do you see us, is the political will there to do that?
I think the one giant lesson is that if we want to maintain a right in this country, it needs to be codified. It needs to be turned into law. The right to same-sex marriage, I believe that bill has interracial marriage in it as well. It's a marriage equality bill. So that's good and exciting. The contraceptive bill failed, though. It's not going to pass. And I think we need to take a real hard look at what that actually means for women in this country and for families in this country. It's going to be devastating if we see the Supreme Court come after contraceptive next, because there is currently not the political willpower in the Congress to make that happen. And we as people, we need to get very loud and very noisy if we want to make our legislatures listen to us and protect that right.
Yeah, that is very scary. The thought that women, not only are you forced to carry a pregnancy to term, but that you may not have legal access across this country to contraceptives. And we know in a lot of red states, they already don't teach sex education in the classroom. So kids are denied information about their bodies and about, sexual intercourse and how babies are made. Yeah, it's all very scary. I usually like to end my show on something positive. Either of you have any glimmer of hope that we are going to turn this around, that we're going to get off this trajectory of sabotaging our rights, and we're going to get to a place where we respect the autonomy of women and our bodies? Any positive thoughts from either of you?
Well, so the last time I was on here, I talked about the midterm elections, and I haven't been super optimistic about Democrats having a blue wave. But I think that my reasoning is that it's too soon. People aren't going to really start to understand the negative consequences of what's going on, but people are going to start understanding it. And those individuals who are uncertain about, this new Dobbs decision, they're going to become certain as they see 10-year-olds being forced to give birth, as they see people being denied medication that they need for, their well-being. They're going to stop being uncertain as they see women not being able to receive a D&C after having a spontaneous miscarriage. So I think that might not happen come November, but it is very likely to happen in the next few years. And so I think that, we should do everything that we can to make November, focus on this issue and get people out to vote based on this issue, but also, keep this issue salient, remind people how important this is, to not, become apathetic, to not just, bow our heads and say, oh no, this is, our lives now, to really, continue the fight.
Really positive words of encouragement, and thank you for helping us end on a positive note. And you're absolutely right. I think people are getting energized. They're starting to see what's at stake. We're hearing some great reporting out of some of the senators, Senate races that are happening in places like Pennsylvania and Ohio and North Carolina and Arizona. So I think there is hope, and we've just got to stay loud about it, and we've got to stay active. Because there is so much at stake in these November elections, including the rights that we all in this country have known and cherished so much. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Lazat, and thank you, Dr. Everett, for joining me this morning, helping us just understand what's at stake. It's all on the line, folks. We got to get out there and vote. That's the bottom line. I want to thank all my guests this morning. Interesting conversation. Again, 50 cents. I don't know what he meant by his comment, but I think we're all in agreement that F the Unborn Child Support Act. I'll just put it very plainly. Any act that is sponsored by Marsha Blackburn and Republican senators from Tennessee and Oklahoma and Montana, you better check the source, because these are the same folks who are doing everything they can to make it completely impossible for women, for poor people, for minoritized people to get access to basic care like health care. So don't tell me that you are interested in a man paying for a fetus that has not been determined even viable, but yet you won't give $300 to a 7-year-old that is literally going without breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Don't be fooled. My words to live by: all that glitters is not gold. And there's nothing golden about the Unborn Child Support Act. It's one big piece of gaslighting. Don't believe it. Don't vote for it. Don't support those senators that are voting for it. And in fact, do the opposite. Those people who are supporting this act are not fit to serve. They don't have our best interest at heart. They clearly don't have the best interest of children at heart. And this act is just one additional piece of evidence. I rest my case. Be safe out there, and remember, we're all in this together.